It's your Catholic Drive Time
with Joe McClane and EmilyiAlcaraz.
Joining us right now by Zoom chat is Dr. Holly Ordway. She is a visiting professor at University of the Houston Baptist University, holds a PhD in English from the University of Massachusetts Amherst. She is the author of Apologetics and the Christian Imagination, as well as, I think, Not God's Type, which is about her conversion experience. Dr. Ordway is also a published poet and subject editor for the Journal of Inkling Studies, and her academic work focuses on the writings of the Inklings, especially C.S. Lewis, JRR Tolkien. Her current book project is the Tolkien's Modern Reading, Middle-earth Beyond and Beyond the Middle... Let me start over. Modern Readings, Middle-earth Beyond the Middle Ages, forthcoming from Word on Fire in 2021. Boy, I really got that wrong, but Dr. Holly Ordway, good morning to you. Thanks for being on the program.
Good morning. My pleasure.
I've seen a lot of videos on Facebook lately of you traveling. I think you're in the UK and sort of reliving some of the places and the moments of Tolkien's life. What got you interested in J.R.R. Tolkien?
Well, I read The Hobbits as a girl, and then read The Lord of the Rings again as a girl. I don't even remember when I first read them. I just remember rereading them, and it's just been really formative for me. And then he's an author that I've kept coming back to. When I was doing my graduate work, I looked at The Lord of the Rings and looked at his great essay on fairy stories. It was just very influential for me also in becoming a Christian, and that he was one of the examples of an author I loved who believed in something that at that point in my life I didn't believe in. So I thought, well, if Tolkien believes this Christian stuff, and so does C.S. Lewis and so do these other poets that I love, well, maybe I at least ought to kind of look into it and see what they understood. And that's something that I talk about in my memoir, Not God's Type. But more of the last few years, well, the last decade actually, I've been working on this book, Tolkien's Modern Reading. Exploring this question of where did the Lord of the Rings come from? Because as someone who's been interested in fantasy literature, for my entire life, basically, the Lord of the Rings is this masterpiece, and is beloved by pretty much, a huge range of people, from non-believers, Catholics of all kinds, Christians of all kinds. And this book is just such a masterpiece. And typically people have assumed that it's sort of backward looking, that it's nostalgic, that's stuck in the past, that Tolkien, because he studied medieval languages, that's all he cared about, that he didn't like anything after Chaucer. That's really a widespread view for a variety of reasons that I talk about in my book. But what I discovered is that that's actually completely incorrect. He really did read very widely in modern literature, and he really engaged thoughtfully in modern culture. He followed the news. He read the newspapers. He was interested in these things. He was actually had a very nuanced view towards science and technology. I just found that to be fascinating. And I'm particularly pleased that this book is coming out from Word on Fire, because I now work for Word on Fire as for the Word on Fire Institute as Fellow of Faith and Culture. And so in my role of, in helping to engage with culture, helping Catholics to understand the culture and engage with it, I think it's very fitting that this book, which is the fruit of 10 years labor, is coming out with Word on Fire, because I discovered, completely to my surprise, honestly, that Tolkien is a really good model for how a Catholic can thoughtfully engage with modern culture, discerning what's good, discerning what isn't so good, and engaging with it in a productive and healthy way.
Now, in the run-up to this conversation this hour, I've been misreporting. Emily's called me out on fake news. I kept saying the conversion of Tolkien, but it wasn't Tolkien that converted, right? I guess it was his mother?
Yeah, his mother Mabel, when he was a boy. So he was born in Church of England. Actually, well, I say in the Church of England, in terms of communion, but he was actually born in Bloemfontein, South Africa, as a little sort of biographical point. And they came to England when he was only 3 years old. His father died, and then his mother became a Catholic and was abandoned by the family. They cut her off very abruptly. And her sister had also converted at the time, had faced the same pressure. And her sister backed off and left the church, and said, well, okay, then I won't be a Catholic. But Mabel, Tolkien's mother, stuck with it because she was convinced that, that was true, and she stuck with it. And this actually contributed to her death in Tolkien's mind, and I think accurately, because she became ill with diabetes, which at that time was not treatable. They hadn't discovered insulin yet. But if she had had better just general health care, which she could have had if she'd had more money, she probably would have lived longer at any rate. But being, cut off from the family, they were very poor. She died quite quickly and left Tolkien an orphan. So he is not exactly a convert, but he did enter the church at the age of reason. And so he was, kind of a what's it called, rocking horse Catholic, not quite a cradle Catholic, but from boyhood.
That's great.
But I think that's not my invention. It's an author whose name I now can't remember. But anyway, he definitely embraced the faith in a conscious way, and he very easily could have walked away from it, as a young man, knowing that his mother's death could have provoked him to go either way. He could have rejected the faith that arguably contributed to her passing away untimely, or he could have done what he did, which is to say, no, this is true, and my mother stuck with it at a cost, and I too will stick with it. And so he was a devout Catholic his entire life. He never had a lapsed period. He was always very self-critical and very hard on himself, about his own failings, which I think just shows that he was just very serious about his faith. But he never fell away. He always stuck with it, and I think it's a really beautiful witness. I think both his mother and himself.
I didn't grow up with Tolkien. I didn't even know he existed. Never heard the name. I didn't hear the name of C.S. Lewis. I didn't hear the name of Chesterton, for that matter, until I was an adult and a convert to the Catholic faith already. Since now I have 6 kids, 2 grandkids. Now my children are Tolkien raving lunatic fans. They try to memorize the Silmarillion, and they try to memorize, Elvish, and I just roll my eyes, when they at the dinner tables. But what's interesting to me is I remember, I think it was a year or 2 years ago, I found a documentary on YouTube about Tolkien and his life. And this is fairly old. This looked like at least the 80s. Could have been late 70s. I don't know. But it's fairly old. It was on YouTube. And in that video, his brother, I guess this is a Jesuit priest, said that he did not believe his brother had included his faith in Lord of the Rings or The Hobbit. I was put back by that. What do you, now having you studied his life as thoroughly as you have, did Tolkien try to share his Catholic faith through his fictional works or not?
He did, but I can see exactly why. That would have been his son, Father John Tolkien, who became a priest.
Okay.
His brother Hilary was a farmer, actually. In any case, it's the answer is yes, he did, but there's a good reason why people say no, he didn't, because he was very keen on doing it in an understated way. So there's a very famous line that in one of his letters where he explains to someone, he says that the Lord of the Rings is a fundamentally religious and Catholic work, unconsciously in the writing and consciously in the revision. Okay, so there's a profound statement that he intends it to be Catholic. He makes it deliberately so as he revises it. But then listen to what he says after that. He says, and that is why I've cut out all the overt religious references in the book. So it's paradoxical until you come to grips with the way that Tolkien's mind worked. He wanted to engage at the deeper level, at the kind of mythic level, at the level of kind of images and deep structures, not at the overt, oh, I recognize that's a Jesus figure kind of level.
Like in C.S. Lewis's Chronicles of Narnia.
Exactly, yes, because he felt that the Chronicles of Narnia were too overt. They were too directly plain in their presentation of the Christian faith. And he wanted in his work to be kind of more, under the radar, if I can use that term. He wanted to be more subtle. So he puts in, if you look at it, you can see there's, it's a fundamentally Catholic vision. And at one point, there's an interview that he did where the interviewer asked him something about, who is Eru, who is Iluvatar? That's the god of mentioned in the Silmarillion. And he says, oh, well, that's God. There is only one God. So he's very clear that the God that's mentioned in the world of Middle Earth is the one God, because as he said, he's a devout Catholic. That's true. There is only one God, and that God is the one that's referenced in his world of Middle Earth. But what does he do? He puts it in frames it in layers of story and character so that it's not obvious. So that when we're reading it, we can think about themes of good and evil. I mean, The Lord of the Rings is profoundly a meditation on death. Tolkien once said that the whole theme of the book is death and the desire for deathlessness. That's a fundamentally Christian and Catholic view. We head to meditation on power and the misuse of power, on mercy and pity. So there's all these really deeply, profoundly Christian aspects of The Lord of the Rings, but very deeply put in so that nothing distracts us. We don't get let off on minutia. So he's doing kind of yes and no approach to doing the Catholic element in his fiction.
So Dr. Ordway, your new book is based on Tolkien's vision that is sort of eternal and not limited to his own time period. What do you think Tolkien would say to our day and age? I can see how these themes are still relevant. I think we've all been meditating on death a whole lot this year, but what would you say Tolkien would say to our modern world?
Well, I think he would say that the issues that we're dealing with are perennial, and that you've got to just stay focused on the fundamental truths of the faith and of human experience. And I think Tolkien, one of the reasons Tolkien's such a powerful figure for our present day is that he went through more change in his life than you can almost imagine. He was born when horses were used as a main form of travel, but when he died, there were supersonic jets. I mean, when he was born, they were still using cavalry in military charges. When he died, Britain had a nuclear arsenal. I mean, the scope of that is just astonishing. And so he fought in the First World War. He fought in the trenches. He got very sick from trench fever, suffered from that the rest of his life. Really, it affected his health. He lived through the Second World War. His sons were, his son Christopher was a Royal Air Force pilot, one of the most dangerous positions that you can possibly have had in the Second World War. So he lived through an amount of turmoil that personally lived through that is just astonishing. And yet he continued to raise his family, stayed married to his wife Edith, raised 4 children, had an academic career, and oh, by the way, wrote these amazing books and kept on with his Catholic faith all the way through his life, even through all the tumult of all this. So I think he's in a way a model for that kind of faithfulness, keeping your eyes on the real things and not getting too distracted.
We're talking with Dr. Holly Ordway, a scholar on Tolkien and other subjects, but we're talking about Tolkien today. And I know there's a lot of parents out there whose children have really loved to read Lord of the Rings and The Hobbit and maybe some of the other works as well. But one of the questions that I had was about C.S. Lewis, really, and about their relationship, Tolkien and C.S. Lewis. I've heard it said that C.S. Lewis would get annoyed with Tolkien for trying to convert him all the time. What was the nature of their relationship?
Well, it was a relationship that spanned many years, from first meeting as young academics in Oxford all the way to Lewis's death in 1963. So like any relationship, it had its ups and its downs, but they were fundamentally very good friends. And And I think sometimes people try to heighten, like they play up moments of discord in that friendship, because I don't know, I guess people find it exciting to think that, Narnia versus Middle Earth or something.
There is no contest. It's definitely, Lord of the Rings. I'm just saying, that's the way it is. Good luck.
I love them both.
Yeah.
I love them both. But I mean, certainly Lewis never became a Catholic, and that was something that obviously Tolkien was sad about. He wished that he had taken the rest of that step. But Tolkien was absolutely fundamental to Lewis becoming a Christian at all. I mean, he really made the arguments to Lewis on that famous Addison's Walk episode, where Lewis was able to say, oh, I get it about Christianity being the true myth, the myth that actually happened in history. It was Tolkien who put that argument to him. So Lewis, recognized that. And that, that's pretty fundamental. And so, sure, Lewis had, kind of mixed feelings and some misconceptions about Catholicism, and he never became a Catholic. But the Inklings as a whole were a mix of Christians of different traditions, and Tolkien was perfectly comfortable with that environment. So I don't think there was any tension in terms of the Catholic angle in that respect. They did disagree on some points. But again, how could you imagine that they wouldn't disagree when their whole friendship was based around getting together at the Eagle and Child and having these boisterous conversations where they would disagree about everything very vehemently, and then have their beer and go home. So we have that. Now, to be sure, later in life, Tolkien was grieved by the fact that Lewis didn't tell him about getting married. Because he had that very strange episode where he first married Joy Gresham in a civil ceremony just to help her stay in England as a friend, and then they fell in love and then end up getting married a second time by an Anglican priest, and then actually being husband and wife. And that's just a very strange episode in Lewis's life. It's it's just like, okay, that's strange. And the fact that he went a whole year without telling his friends that he had done this civil marriage.
Yeah.
I can see rightly that Tolkien was a bit hurt by that. Like, come on, man, you're my friend, and you failed to tell me this thing that you did. So I think that stung. But after that, they carried on, and I think again, Tolkien, he was a faithful Catholic, and he understood the importance of forgiveness. And I think it's significant that in Lewis's later years, Tolkien actually pretty much moved heaven and earth to get him a teaching job at Cambridge University, the chair of medieval and Renaissance literature, that he knew was going to be ideal for Lewis. This is after, Joy's death. He's basically moves heaven and earth to get that job for him. And that's something that he really would only have done, I think, out of true friendship, because, it took a lot of effort, a lot of work for him to secure this job for Lewis. Again, doing it purely out of friendship. So I think the relationship is complex, but these are two complex men with, lots going on in their lives. And I think the fundamental thing is that they did have that core friendship. Even though they weren't both Catholics, they did have that core respect and love for the Lord. And I think it's a good model for us,
We have about 5 minutes left in our interview with Dr. Holly Ordway, who is writing Tolkien's Modern Reading, and she's also a fellow at the Word on Fire Institute. Dr. Ordway, I wanted to hear a little bit more about your conversion. So can you tell us why were you an atheist, and what convinced you to convert to the Catholic faith?
Well, I grew up in a non-religious household, so I basically started as kind of a complete pagan. And then when I went off to college, I was just exposed to, the general secular narrative that Christianity is just, a historical curiosity at best, a stupid superstition at most. And I just picked it up. I absorbed it. I had atheist friends and just kind of went with it. And I lacked any exposure to thoughtful Christians. I think that's really key. I didn't have anybody presenting a witness of a thoughtful faith. I just didn't know anybody who was a Christian. And the things I saw in the media were all very stereotyped, very extreme, again, not presenting anything that made it even worth considering to be a Christian. And so, going forward, I just became more and more convinced that atheism was true. So by the time I was in my 20s, I thought, all religion is just, made up. It's pretty grim, but we got to face it. There's no such thing as God, etc. And yet, all these authors whom I really loved were devout Christians. And I wrote my dissertation on fantasy, engaged with Lewis, engaged with Tolkien. So by the time I got into my first teaching position as a professor of English, and I was again coming back to teaching Christian poetry because it was good poetry, I just really found myself saying, maybe this isn't quite as stupid and shallow as I thought. Because these authors like Tolkien and Lewis, whom I admire so much, they believe it. So why don't I kind of investigate? And that was what got me into trouble, so to speak, because as I began to finally ask, what do Christians believe, willing to hear the answers and not dismiss them, then I became convinced that they believed it because it was true. So I became a Christian, was an Episcopalian for a few years, and then became a Catholic a few years later as I realized that the question of authority really was what drew me in. I accepted that the Bible is the Word of God, but where do we get the Bible? How do we interpret it? I've have many friends and colleagues from across different Christian traditions, and I saw that these people from very different backgrounds genuinely love the Lord. They're faithful Christians. They're sincere. They're intelligent. They're thoughtful. So it didn't allow me to say, well, I'm just smarter than they are or more devout. No, absolutely not. These people are intelligent, thoughtful, devout, and yet they believe totally incompatible things. Does baptism actually remove original sin or not? And that led me to look for the place that could actually give me a definitive answer, and that was the Catholic Church.
I want to encourage you, dear listener, to pick up her book, Not God's Type, An Atheist Academic Lays Down Her Arms, published by Ignatius Press back in 2014. Now, we're out of time here. We've been speaking with Dr. Holly Ordway about Tolkien. When do you expect this book to come out from Word on Fire? You got about 15 seconds.
Comes out on January 25th, so very soon. And
all right.
Everyone can look wordonfire.org/Tolkien.
Dr. Holly Ordway, thank you for being on with us and sharing with us the life of JRR Tolkien. We're very grateful to you.
Thanks.
God love you. God bless you. That's going to do it for Catholic Drive Time for today.
Thank you for joining us on Your Catholic Drive Time, where it is our pleasure to keep you informed and inspired.
Join us Monday through Friday at the same time, right here on your favorite Catholic radio station.
Don't forget to connect with us. Just go to facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Again, that's facebook.com/Catholic Drive Time.
Be sure to share more than just us today. Share Jesus with everyone you meet.
Bye now, and God love you.